Hey, back so soon. I know. Well, I want to come out here and say some answers that a particular person who commented on one of my videos brought up. And it's whether astrology is accurate, basically, from what I understand. If it's a legitimate thing, really, because he raised the fact that astrology is considered a pseudoscience to not being proven and many times disproven through experiments. Okay. The kind of astrology that actually applies to real life isn't the kind that you see today. Okay, today it is a business. You will be hard pressed to find somebody willing to talk about astrology for free on the internet. Most of that knowledge is exploited by con men and so-called psychics. Okay, so when you are talking about astrology, you gotta separate it from that world because that's not true. Anything tied in with money is not true. That's just a fact. Maybe you can't really prove it, but you see, I kind of use that as a rule of thumb for me in finding out whether something or not is true or not. Because in the Bible, Jesus, he never once got angry or violent except when he walked into the temple where they were cheating people out of their money in the marketplace. And he took all their stuff and just threw it around and said, "Get out of here, you're desecrating the soil of God," or something to that effect. Because, the truth is that that's the biggest harm to humanity in history of existence. Money. People cheat, lie, and do anything for money. So that's not true. Anyway, astrology in the mythological sense. Okay, when I'm talking about astrology, I'm talking about the diagrams and hieroglyphs and all of that information found by archaeologists, anthropologists, linguists, okay? That's a lot of stuff that is not paid attention to in our society, especially America. And if you are somebody who lives in America, you've been indoctrinated by this system of science and math because we live here detached from a lot of ancient knowledge and even foreign knowledge that we are so oblivious to, and that makes our society a certain way. And that's why we have this disposition called ethnocentrism, where we look at everything else as if it's not normal or inferior, okay? When you take anthropology, one of the first things they teach you and I know because I'm talking out of experience, I'm taking an anthropology class right now, is that if you want to be a good anthropologist, you cannot bring your personal bias into the equation. But that's not how it always was. And it often isn't, especially with the majority of people. And actually, that's kind of the way humans were created, you know. But that's another thing. Unless you're an actual scientist that is aware of like deep theories about these things, if you're just following off a high school level understanding of science, then yes, you've been indoctrinated by the paradigm dynamic of religion versus science, where they play those two off against each other. And actually the word science in Latin, it actually means to divide and scatter. Scissor, and something like that too. I'm not an expert at that, but that's the thing, guys. Where did the word science come from? Where did the words even come from? Where did your name come from? Where did your last name come from? Do you ever think of that? Who's creating all these letters and codes and sounds? Linguistics? Oh, never heard of that. Ever heard of learning another language? Try to think in some other way. You can't translate certain things into languages. It's just not possible. And then, if that's the case with languages that we have, what about languages that came before us? What about Asian languages? That's a very difficult language to learn, because they talk differently in symbols, okay? You want to know why being a computer programmer is some tough shit? Because you gotta be a fucking genius to understand this kind of stuff. And don't be thinking that the kind of scientists that talk online in the media and write your high school textbooks are the same scientists running the technology, science, and business, you know, in Apple, for example. Those guys know this kind of stuff, okay? And it's more than science. You know, sure, you can call me a slacker, idiot, or whatever for being young and kind of like, I don't know, different maybe. Sure, that's what my people call my generation, like the lazy, I forget the article that said it. But yeah. What was I gonna say to that? It's not that it isn't true. They don't want you to believe it's true because you are paying them. You are giving them all your money by not knowing what the truth is. You are buying into their matrix. And if you want to go into the details, you know, they never teach you this in the beginning of a science course, but they do towards the end, because it's kind of like stuff that's not practiced, but it's part of the field, which is true. Chemistry, physics, astrophysics, astronomy. There is a certain point, and that point is the point that is the most radical point, and they will often be discredited severely because that's actually the point that is ballsy, usually enough, to approach the extremely taboo areas in the subject, and not going with any bias and observing the situation in the most natural way possible. And this is a thing, guys. How can you be sure of anything? Because Reality is so fragile. They did experiments. It's called the Rutherford gold-foiled experiment. And this basically illustrated what an atom looks like. And how its structure is a thin shell of matter, okay, yes, and then the protons, neutrons, electrons also make up a very tiny percentage of matter, and then the rest is empty space. So you get this kind of image of a bubble. That's very important to remember. In bubbles, she was born. You know, when they talk about how Aphrodite was born out of the genitalia of Poseidon or whatnot, and she came out of the sea foam of the ocean in a oyster type thing, and something Hermes was flying by, or it's a whole elaborate imagery thing. What did that tell us? So that tells us this atom, for starters, there's a lot of stuff in there considered to be empty space, and that empty space is unknown. Schrodinger's cat. And this is quantum physics, quantum science theory. Here's another thing. A lot of science, especially the kind that people use to degrade modern theory, is very archaic. Because the newer science hasn't been tapped into yet, you know, because they hate rewriting textbooks, I'm telling you, man. They will do anything they can to keep from rewriting those textbooks. And man, this is definitely something to basically trash every single idea, like gravity even, out the door. Because atoms are not even like particles. They're waves. And what's more is that the fact that we, as the observer, are looking at them, that affects whether or not it's a particle or a wave. And every time we look at it, it's a particle. But that's only because we're expecting to see a particle. But on its own, until we actually look, it has a 50-50 chance of being either a wave or a particle. Yeah. 10th grade chemistry, that's really the thing you gotta pay attention to in the class. And Schrodinger does this with his classy experiment, with the blindfolds. And he came to the conclusion of wave-particle duality, which I just talked about. And this gave way to quantum mechanics, fundamental theory in physics, which describes nature at the small scales of energy levels of atoms and subatomic particles. Yes. Classical physics is a set of fundamental theories which describes nature of ordinary macroscopic scale. Most theories in classical physics can be described, can be derived from quantum mechanics as an approximation valid at large macroscopic scale. Quantum mechanics differs from classical physics in that energy, momentum, and other quantities of a system may be restricted to discrete values. Quantization objects have characteristics of both particles and waves, and there are limits to the precision of with which quantities can be known. uncertainty principle. When you subscribe to mainstream science and you deny the power of fairy tales, myths, Bible, spirituality, if you don't keep an open enough mind to let the love seep in to your soul, really, because we live in a patriarchal society that views visual arts and music and languages as unnecessary. That's your indoctrination here in America. If you don't know that, well, there you go. You learn something new every day. There you go. Now you know. Now you know that you are being told to practice science, math, and law because that is what the patriarchy demands from you. If it was the other way around, but it's not, for a reason, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing right now. You wouldn't be thinking these thoughts. What you need is that feminine energy. See here, I have a little chart of all the energies, particularly in astrology, and you see, this is just a starting point, okay? There is so much out there. This is just a simple law of duality. Now, they don't talk about astrology in that sense when they do scientific tests to disprove it. Yeah, it is true that in a lot of polls, I remember reading about one poll that they conducted in Sweden or something, saying that like a large percentage of people did not identify with their attributed zodiac sign, astrology sign. How do people use astrology signs in modern society today? They use it in a very casual, like playful way. They just say, "Oh, I'm a Gemini" or "I'm a Sagittarius," but that's just your sun sign. And there's so much that makes up a single person. The short answer is that we are every sign. Yeah, that's really it. There is no differentiation between any of us. We are all just different combinations of one entity. Dark matter is unknown. But it's out there. Just try to understand that I'm also a person that only recently has been able to start talking. I was silent for a long time. I kept my mouth shut for a very long time because I knew that if I started talking, they would definitely come out and say I was crazy. Everyone is absolutely entitled to their opinion, but I think we should all do this in a respectful manner. If you disagree with me, that's absolutely fine. I'm not saying I have the answers, and please don't put it on me to be the best person to describe something, because I'm not. I only recently begun talking in a coherent manner because I used to stutter a lot and not really be able to get my ideas out because of anxiety. I was really shy, just scared of people, and that allowed me to do a lot of thinking early on in life, because I was not talking. I was just sitting and observing life around me while everyone else was involved in the living aspect. So I take it that I'm controversial, but I'm just doing this because I want to. I want to know what's real and what's not. I want to know what the truth is. I want to know a lot of it. And I'm doing it in a way that makes sense to me, because I found a lot of the stuff that makes sense for everybody else doesn't for me. And that's fine, because I don't mind being alone, ever. I don't need to be a part of this world in that way. I'm comfortable doing things on my own, because I am self-sufficient, and I've been brought up that way where I had to be. Start off with language, really, because don't we all want to know who's the voice talking the whole time?